Hello and welcome to this month's Axial Systems Talk IT Security webinar.
If you don't already know us, we're an award-winning provider of innovative network, security and services solutions. Since our launch in 1989, we've just celebrated our quarter century. We've served a wide range of customers from all the sectors you see on your screen and more. We're technically very well resourced and highly capable, which not only allows us to tailor our best-of-breed technologies and solutions to meet individual customers' requirements, but also gives us the capability to provide exceptional pre- and post-sales support. So, that's a quick thumbnail sketch of who we are. There's more on our website, of course, but for now, let me hand you over to this month's specialist for our Axial Talk IT Security webinar.
Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar, From Security by Silo to Security Connected, looking at how to achieve interoperability across network security. My name is Tom Reeve, Senior Reporter on SC Magazine. Achieving faster response times, this is what IT managers strive for every day, but manual information feeds, human intervention, and Excel dashboards can be the reason for response delays in a well-established and organized IT department. So how do you overcome these delays and minimize the time from detection to protection? Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Robert Dumigan, Director of EMEA Pre-Sales at Intel Security, who will talk about how you can automate your reporting processes to achieve real-time situational awareness and remediate threats in minutes instead of hours or even days. Intel Security Pre-Sales partners with enterprises across EMEA to realize solutions that address security and business needs, balancing cost of ownership with security. Robert's 15-year career includes global enterprise consulting and software, including helping some of the world's largest telecommunications service providers implement platform-based architectures for service creation and delivery, billing, and security. We'll have Q&As following Robert's presentation, so you're welcome to ask questions via the interface at any time. Welcome, Robert. We're pleased to have you with us.
Thank you, Tom. I am delighted to be here today. I'm very excited to get the opportunity to speak to you today on my favorite topic, security, and certainly on my favorite subject within that topic, why the security industry must evolve from security by silo to security connected. And over the next 40 minutes or so, I will speak of a paradigm shift that the industry is undergoing presently in terms of security architectures. And I will explain in particular the trends in the threat landscape that are driving this paradigm shift, if you like. So our discussion will focus on targeted attacks. We'll study the attack chain of an advanced persistent threat. We'll discuss in particular how rapid sharing of threat intelligence across security controls is really critically important to mitigating these types of threats. And I will use a specific use case to illustrate some points and also to share some best practices with you. But in the first instance, what I would like to do is I'd like to set the scene, if you like, by taking a macro level, a high-level look at the security challenge that enterprises face. And of course, this is a very diverse subject, and the security challenges faced by enterprise varies very significantly depending on the scale and the scope of that enterprise. However, Intel's experience is also that the security challenge faced by enterprises depends on the approach that enterprise takes to security. So, for example, irrespective of their scale and scope, enterprises that adopt a proactive approach to security have a very similar set of challenges in our experience. So a proactive approach is one where an enterprise is increasing their security spend and deploying additional security controls with the goal of improving their security posture. And quite often, regulatory demands and compliance can serve as the driver. And enterprises that adopt this very proactive approach very often also adopt what we call a layered defense in depth strategy, where they deploy multiple security controls, typically from different vendors and at different layers, from the network perimeter right into the endpoint. And the theory behind that approach is that if the threat successfully bypasses security control A from vendor X at layer 1, then security control B from vendor Y at layer 2 will mitigate the threat. And this layered defense in depth strategy is widely recognized and followed as a best practice, because just about every security professional out there working in corporate or enterprise security, myself included, proposed and continue to propose it as a best practice. However, this proactive approach has led to challenges for enterprises, and in particular it's led to a challenge around complexity, operational complexity and related costs, because if you have this defense in depth strategy where each security control is deployed in a silo, independently of every other security control, with no integration of security controls from even a management perspective, this can lead to operational complexity and significant related operational costs. So if you consider the backdrop of a continuing sprawl of disparate security management consoles from lots of different vendors across network, gateway, and endpoint, enterprises face an almost impossible task of looking to optimize their security operations and achieving and demonstrating compliance. So complexity and cost is an issue. And we see enterprises adopt different tactics and strategies in order to address this, such as consolidating on vendors, consolidation of management infrastructures, looking at managed service provider model, looking at cloud-delivered security models, etc. And all of those will certainly help in that regard. But speaking as a security guy, in addition to the cost and complexity challenge, for me as a security person, there is a greater challenge. And of course the greater challenge is the security challenge, because enterprises with this type of proactive approach that are seeing their security total cost of ownership skyrocket quite often falsely start to believe that their security posture must be increasing commensurate with that spend. And of course we know from the almost daily reporting of very large data breaches that this is not necessarily the case. And we hear time and time again of very well-funded organizations being breached. So if we look at one example, we pick an example that's very well documented and all the information I'm about to discuss is in the public domain. We look at Target, a very large North American retailer that had a very significant data breach in the late 2013. Credit card details for 40 million of their customers were stolen after RAM scraping malware was introduced into their point-of-sale network across 1,800 of their stores in North America. The net, or the result to Target of this breach was over $750 million in market capitalization loss directly as a result. So this is a very significant industry issue and challenge. Now, Target is a very well-funded organization, and they did invest in a significant amount of security controls. And in fact, it's been very widely reported that one of those security controls actually detected the malware, and it sent an alert to the security operations team that managed security for Target. But the unfortunate thing for Target and for that security operations team is that that alert was just one of many thousands of alerts that the security ops team received that day. Moreover, that security control, it was a sandbox technology, was not integrated into any other security controls. And so the intelligence, the alert, did not get turned into actionable intelligence. There was no action taken in an automated way. And the result is widely known and has been reported in terms of how that impacted Target. So there must be a better way. And at Intel, we feel that there must be a better way. There must be a way of improving security posture, but at the same time removing that operational complexity and reducing overall total cost of ownership. There must be a way of optimizing security architectures such that only the relevant alerts bubble to the surface, and that these alerts get turned into intelligence that is actionable, intelligence where action is taken not in a very manual way, but in an automated way. And at Intel, we call this better way security connected architecture. And by security connected, I am talking about consolidation of management infrastructure. I guess I am talking about reducing operational complexity through reducing vendors, reducing management console footprint. When I speak about connectedness, I am also talking about connecting security controls via point-to-point integration. So, for example, it's really critical that your endpoint security sensors are integrated with your network security controls, such that when a network security control sees a threat, it knows the endpoint that's being targeted and whether that threat is relevant to that endpoint, whether that endpoint is both vulnerable and at risk to that threat. Endpoint and network and gateway security controls should be aware of each other through integration. I'm talking about all of that, but I'm also talking about much, much more than that. And in order for me to explain the much, much more, if you like, I would like us to take a look at the threat landscape. And I would like us in particular to take a look at advanced persistent threats. And an advanced persistent threat is very different to a mass market opportunistic malware. An advanced persistent threat is orchestrated by a very well organized and well funded adversary. They target a specific enterprise or a government, and most typically a specific user in that enterprise. And of course they leverage advanced techniques. Typically they will leverage stealth techniques, for example, such as kernel mode rootkits, in order to go low and slow, because their overall mission is to remain covert over a long period of time and to exfiltrate the targeted data or intellectual property to a remote command and control server over time. And I want us to look at and to study the behavior of advanced persistent threats over the next 10 minutes or so, because advanced persistent threats are serving as the driver behind this significant paradigm shift that we are currently seeing in terms of security architectures. And in order for us to study and understand advanced persistent threats in more detail, I want us to look at the attack chain for a moment. So I'm sure many of you listening are aware of the work of Lockheed Martin Corporation, and they wrote a white paper on intrusion kill chains. And the white paper they published outlines the specific processes and stages or steps, if you like, an adversary goes through in a targeted attack. So we see in step one, in reconnaissance, the attacker will research, identify, and select the target. And they do this by crawling social networking sites on the internet, by performing scans of the environment itself, perhaps, to build up an intelligence picture. An intelligence picture that will include email addresses, social relationships, and of specific technologies that are used in that environment. In the next step, in step two, weaponization, the attacker will develop the exploit coupled with the actual malware payload. Typically they do this using an automated tool. And this is most often a Trojan malware, and most of all we see that client applications like Adobe or Microsoft Word act and serve as the weaponized deliverable. So with the weaponized deliverable, the next step, delivery, the attacker will transmit the weapon to the targeted environment. And most often we see email and web, or a hybrid combination of both, or perhaps physical USB removable media being the most leveraged attack vectors: email, web, and the physical. So if we pause here just for a moment and we consider, how difficult do you think it might be for a motivated attacker to determine across step 1, 2, and 3, for example, that I'm Robert Dumigan, I'm a director in Intel pre-sales for Intel security, so I must have access, and I do have access to a significant amount of sensitive customer data and employee data and multiple accounts and credentials on internal systems such as our Salesforce automation. How difficult do you think it is for a well-motivated attacker to discover that I'm passionate about road cycling, that I'm a member of a cycling club, and that I receive the route for my Sunday morning spin every Friday via email from the administrator at our cycling club, admin@middletoncc.ie. How difficult do you think it would be for somebody to find out that I have a Yahoo email account? I mean, all of that information could probably be determined after 30 minutes of research on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and Google. So the attacker would have sufficient reconnaissance to decide on a weaponized deliverable and an attack vector, which could possibly be a spear phishing email looking like it came from admin@middletoncc.ie, my cycling club, with a PDF attachment, supposedly including the map and details for my Sunday morning spin, where that PDF acts as the weaponized deliverable. So this isn't terribly difficult, but it is. These are steps that the attacker will go through in terms of building up that intelligence picture, deciding on the weaponized deliverable, and then actually moving forward towards delivery. And after delivery, of course, in step 4, they need to exploit. So after delivering the weaponized deliverable, they must exploit a weakness or a vulnerability, either in an operating system or in an application, in order to trigger their code and to get written to disk. And then after exploitation, it's all about remaining persistent inside the environment. So in step 5, the attacker will install a remote access Trojan or a backdoor on the victim system, which allows it to establish connectivity to an external command and control server in step 6. And advanced persistent threats require manual interaction. The intruders like to have hands on the keyboard access inside the target environment. So now, after stepping through step 1 to step 6, only now can the intruder take action on their original objectives. And the objective is most typically data exfiltration, which involves the collection, the encryption, and the extraction of information. There are times where the intruder may only use that initial victim as a hot point in order to compromise additional systems and to move laterally, if you like, inside the network. So why would we use the attack chain? I mean, I recommend that we all develop strong knowledge of the attack chain and strong knowledge of the specific processes an adversary undertakes to target an enterprise, so that we can improve ourselves as defenders. We can implement models for actionable intelligence. We can measure our own performance, and we can start to fill the gaps in our defenses. And whilst the good news is that the APT, the attacker, if you like, must be successful across each phase in sequence. The defender needs only to mitigate or protect and detect against any one phase in order to block successfully. So that's the good news. And the further good news is that there is no shortage of security controls out there. There's certainly no shortage of security vendors out there that will provide you with effective mitigation at each step or at each phase. So, for example, if we deploy email and web gateways at the gateway layer, and we couple that with device control on the hosts, we can block delivery at step 3 across those 3 key delivery vectors, if you like: email, web, and USB key, USB-based devices. For example, having a patch management system coupled with vulnerability shielding provided by some host intrusion prevention system, that will prevent the targeted vulnerability from being exploited in step 4. And even if the intruder is successful up to establishing connectivity to the remote command and control server, well, then your firewalls at both host and perhaps network perimeter may block this outbound connection as suspicious in step 6. And these layered defense in depth architectures really are very good and effective. However, it isn't all good news, because there is a pretty significant design flaw in how these defense in depth layered architectures typically work. when it comes to defending against an advanced persistent threat. And in order to explain this design flaw, if you like, I want to call out one key difference between the modus operandi of an APT or targeted attack and that of an opportunistic malware attack. So once again, let's consider that layered defense in depth architectural approach, where we deploy multiple security controls at different layers, typically from different vendors, in order to have effective mitigation against each step of the attack chain or the intruder kill chain. For opportunistic malware attacks, such as mass market crypto ransomware or botnet activity, once blocked, the threat is stopped, and the threat or the attacker simply moves on to the next target on the list. So in the case of crypto ransomware, this is typically just the next email recipient on the list. They don't worry about the fact that they were blocked, they just move on to the next target, if you like. However, the advanced persistent threats behave very differently because they work on the basis of trial and error. They do not give up. Each time they're blocked, they simply cycle back to the first couple of steps of the attack chain and they adjust their tactics. So they may loop back and try a different delivery vector, or they may try a different exploit or a different payload. They may even increase their budget and purchase a zero-day vulnerability to use at the exploitation step. They will try over and over again until they are ultimately successful. They do this because they're adaptive. And I said that the good news is that the intruder has to be successful across all phases of the attack chain in order to be ultimately successful and to take action on their data exfiltration objectives. However, the bad news is that they don't give up, and whilst the defender needs to be successful every time, the intruder need only be successful on one occasion. However, these advanced persistent threats do leave footprints of information. They leave these footprints or these little indicators of their activities available in each of the various siloed security controls. So the question we need to ask is, how can we integrate all of these silos to achieve real-time situational awareness? I mean, it makes complete sense, for example, that if an email gateway in your DMZ, in your gateway layer, if that blocks a spear phishing email, it should share all of the intelligence that it has gathered about the adversary in that interaction with every other security control in the environment. It should be able to share all of the indicators of compromise for that attack with every other security control in the environment, such that all of the security controls may update their defenses, such that the architecture is not a series of independent security controls operating independently of each other in silo, but instead your security architecture is operating as an integrated system of systems. And I said at the outset that our vision for security connected architecture was much more than management layer consolidation and point-to-point product integration. Our vision is that the security industry must evolve from security by silo to security platform. And an underpinning technology in any platform, and an underpinning technology in particular in a security platform, is a standardized integration and exchange layer, i.e. a standardized way to integrate coupled with a common language for each of the security controls to speak. And this is what Intel Security has delivered to the market in 2015. And we've done so through delivery of our data exchange layer, or to give it its three-letter acronym, or DXL. And in order to explain the data exchange layer, I'd like to use the analogy of the human body. So in our bodies, we have a bunch of sensors. We're able to touch, we're able to smell, we're able to see. In the same way that in security, we also have lots of different sensors. We have sensors at the network perimeter through our firewalls and IDS, IPS. We have sensors in gateway through email and web filtering platforms. We also have sensors, of course, closer to the endpoints on our client operating systems in the data center, etc. But in the human body, we also have the central nervous system. The central nervous system takes information from these sensors, takes alerts from these sensors, and it passes it to the brain in real time. And the brain turns this information into intelligence, and it takes action in an automated way. So that, for example, if you put your hand on something very hot, immediately your brain will tell your arm, your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist to move away from that which is very hot. And that is, put simply, exactly what we believe is required for security. A central nervous system for security. And that's the best way that I can explain our data exchange layer. The data exchange layer is a real-time, bidirectional messaging fabric. You may also hear people in Intel and Intel security refer to it as a messaging bus. Over this messaging fabric, all security components integrate. It's bidirectional because the security components can both publish and or subscribe or consume information over this communications bus. It's also open by design. In fact, the data exchange layer is Intel Security's proposed standard to the market for integration of cross-vendor security controls. A security platform cannot and should not be a single vendor monolithic architecture. There is no one single vendor out there that can provide you with all of the security controls that are necessary. And for security controls from different vendors to integrate with sufficient scale and ease, standardization is required. And what we found through integrating our own internal products through this messaging bus, if you like, and through integrating third parties that are in our partner program onto this messaging bus, we found that it provides for rapid onboarding of new security controls to the platform versus the traditional point-to-point API approach. And so when all these security controls are integrated with the data exchange layer, they effectively operate as one. So in an adaptive system of systems, if you go back to the white paper from Lockheed Martin on the intruder kill chain, they state that security controls that gather and leverage knowledge of the adversary should create what they describe as an intelligence feedback loop. So this should provide the defender with a state of information superiority which decreases the attacker's likelihood of success. So for each intrusion attempt, the defender should be gathering all of the intelligence that it has gathered, sharing that across the system so that the defense of the system is improving with each and every intrusion attempt from the attacker. This is sometimes also described as an intelligence-driven network defense, and the data exchange layer, if you like, is the underpinning platform technology that enables this approach to security. Now, I don't want to speak just in abstract terms. I do want to use a use case example of the data exchange layer to outline exactly how the security controls may operate as one, as a system of systems, if you like. So now I'm going to shift gears a little, and I'm going to get a little bit more tactical on a specific solution called Threat Intelligence Exchange, or TIE. And TIE is the first of many security solutions Intel Security has brought to the market that leverages this data exchange layer and our security platform architecture. And it solves a specific problem related to advanced persistent threats, APTs, because TIE significantly reduces the time from encounter to full containment of an advanced targeted attack. And I read the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report each year because it provides excellent insight into the threat landscape. And one of the insights it provides each year is that in the most recent year, it stated that up to 80% of the data breaches they investigated The breach itself wasn't detected for weeks, if not months or years. And once a detection was made, their data suggests that in almost 80% of those cases, again, it took days, weeks, or months to fully contain the breach. Now, this is obviously very significant because an attacker can exfiltrate a significant amount of data in days, weeks, and especially in terms of months. So what do we need to combat this? Well, our vision is that what is needed is adaptive threat prevention in real time, something that can significantly reduce that time elapsed from encounter to full containment, from days, weeks, or even months, right down to milliseconds. And the speed of sharing of threat intelligence across all of the security controls in that platform architecture really is key to achieving this. And this is what the Threat Intelligence Exchange from Intel Security provides. It allows our customers to apply the power of knowledge to leverage that intelligence. So TIE is generally available today to all Intel Security customers that use our Endpoint Security Management Platform, EPO, in combination with our Endpoint Anti-Malware Solution, VirusScan Enterprise. It supports a lot of different use cases, but for the purpose of the conversation now, I want us to think of two key Threat Intelligence Exchange use cases. The first is that it improves endpoint threat detection. Secondly, it provides for speed of threat intelligence sharing across all of the DXL connected security controls. So, in the first instance, in terms of improving endpoint threat detection, it does that by making more accurate file execution decisions. It makes more accurate file execution decisions based on combining intelligence from local endpoint context and all of the currently available collective threat intelligence. And we'll look at a use case in more detail around that. McAfee Threat Intelligence Exchange also makes it possible for security operations to tailor their own local threat intelligence. So by tailor, I mean to assemble, to augment, and to tune threat intelligence from global intelligence data sources, such as our own Intel Security Global Threat Intelligence, and also third-party feeds, for example from VirusTotal, with their own local threat intelligence, which is being sourced from what is happening in their own environment in real time and from historical event data. Information that's coming from endpoints, from gateways, and from all of the security components. And then, by leveraging the data exchange layer, TIE provides a new architecture for speed of sharing of this threat intelligence across all of the security controls. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like to take a look in the first instance at the high-level solution architecture. And the first component we have is the TIE server, the Threat Intelligence Exchange server. This acts as a central repository for all the gathered threat intelligence. So put simply, it's a database, and it's managed via our ePolicy Orchestrator endpoint security management tool. And then we have the TIE client. Now this is a very low agent footprint. It's provided as a plugin to our VirusScan Enterprise. So VirusScan Enterprise is a solution prerequisite. And then of course we have the actual data exchange layer. Now this leverages a messaging technology that's already widely proven commercially on a massive scale, and so it uses negligible network bandwidth, and the connection between the client and the DXL is based on a persistent connection secured via TLS encryption. And it's also highly scalable. So a DXL broker can support from tens up to hundreds of thousands of clients. And it supports various different communication models. And through the use case that we look at, I will explain how it supports a publish and subscribe communication model that's used by the Threat Intelligence Exchange. So I mentioned two key use cases, the first being how TIE can improve endpoint detection. And we know that blacklisting or signature-based antivirus alone is no longer sufficient against the backdrop of today's threat landscape with increasing use of polymorphic techniques and zero-day malware. And whilst AV is a necessary countermeasure, it should be one of multiple layers. It should be considered perhaps the last layer of defense on an endpoint, if you like. So we need to combine blacklisting with threat intelligence or file reputation information. So threat intelligence from McAfee Global Threat Intelligence, and also from third-party vendor threat intelligence. And we need to combine that with local threat intelligence collected from the threat activity across all of our sensors locally. And equally important is to use local context so that we're more contextually aware. So TIE does all of this, and in so doing, it makes more accurate file execution decisions. So when a file is to be executed on an endpoint, and it's the first time that we've seen this file in our environment, the endpoint will query the Threat Intelligence Exchange server and ask it to provide all of the stored collective intelligence it has about this file. And once it receives it, the TIE client module will combine that with all of the locally observed context, so file and process and environmental attributes. And then it will funnel it through its rules and policy engine. And this is a tunable policy engine, the purpose of which is to decide on a classification, where the classification will then result in an action being taken. So if a file is classified as clean, obviously it will be executed. If a file is classified as dirty or black or malicious, its execution will be prevented. It may either be erased or quarantined. If the file's classification is undetermined, and if there are additional file filtering, advanced anti-malware or sandboxing technology in place, the file may be submitted to that advanced threat defense, advanced anti-malware solution for further classification. So this covers, at a high level at least, how the Threat Intelligence Exchange standalone improves endpoint detection. Now what I also want to do is I want us to focus on how TIE leverages the data exchange layer to rapidly share threat intelligence across all of the different security controls in the platform. So in this architecture, you see the previous components that I've mentioned, and in addition you also see the McAfee Advanced Threat Defense. So this is our advanced anti-malware product. And in this example, if an endpoint attempts to execute a file that the local virus scan enterprise has never seen, and it's not in the DAT file, it sends a fingerprint of this file, a file hash, through the data exchange layer to the threat intelligence server. And it asks the threat intelligence exchange server, is this a known file? Do you have intelligence for this file, and can you provide me with all of the stored collective intelligence about this file? So in this case, the Threat Intelligence Exchange server has decided that no, I do not have a reputation for this file. So from this point, the TIE server will check our own global threat intelligence in the cloud for a reputation. And it will also check external third-party sources of threat intelligence. So in this case, it could be checking for file reputation in VirusTotal. And then it will send back the results of those checks to the endpoint. Once the endpoint receives the results, it will take that information and it will combine it with the locally observed context for that file. So for example, it will look at execution location. Is this file executing from a hidden directory or from a recycle bin? It will look at other behaviors such as, did this executable launch a child process? And if so, what is that doing? So it funnels it through its rules and policy engine after that, and then it decides on a classification decision about the file, which in turn maps to an action, as we've described. So at this stage, what I'd like to do is I'd like to assume that the file is, after all of that, still unknown, has never been seen. And that by policy, the enterprise has decided to send all unknown files, all gray files if you like, which are neither known to be good or bad, to send them to an advanced threat defense, an advanced anti-malware solution. Now, our advanced anti-malware solution, advanced threat defense, will combine dynamic code analysis with static code analysis. Dynamic code analysis means spinning up a virtual machine that mirrors the endpoint, that's the target, and actually executing the file in that sandbox, which is a safe place to execute it to see if it does anything malicious. It needs also to do static code analysis because the malware creator may have built-in logic to say to the payload, do not execute if it's in a virtual environment. So we also need to unpack the code and examine the code to see if there is anything malicious in that code, or if it's a member of any malicious known malware family, for example. So now I'd like to introduce to the architecture the additional security controls that are in this environment. From a network IPS, perhaps there's a firewall at the perimeter or a next generation firewall. Perhaps there's web gateway and email gateway security controls in the gateway layer, and also perhaps there's a SIM, a security information and event management solution. All of these security components are also integrated with the data exchange layer. And so ATD decides, actually, this file is malicious. It will provide that information to the TIE server, and the TIE server will immediately publish that information to the data exchange layer. And so every security control connected to the data exchange layer receives that classification update. They receive the intelligence via the data exchange layer, and they automatically update their defenses. So we have an unknown file executing on an endpoint, and through a combination of antivirus, internal and external reputation checks, a study of the local context, and lastly, because it was required, advanced anti-malware techniques, we determine that the file is malicious. And then this classification and all of the related indicators of compromise is immediately shared with every security control in the environment, such that the system and each system in the platform proactively and in an automated way updates its defenses. And all of this takes place in milliseconds of time elapsed. And so the next obvious question is, has this threat ever been seen in my environment before? And so our enterprise security manager, our security information and event management, may also consume the indicators of compromise, if you like, of this threat. And through a capability known as backtrace, it can ask that question. Ask the question, have I ever seen this threat before? So, for example, if the malware had attempted to open a connection to a remote command and control server, the IP address of the command and control server serves as one of the indicators of compromise. And through this backtrace capability of the ESM, we can search through up to 60 days of logs in firewalls and IPS switches, in desktop firewalls, to see if this IP address, or indeed if any of the atomic indicators of the compromise was observed in any other events. And if it is matched, then remediation actions are available. And so in summary, in terms of the threat intelligence exchange, it delivers adaptive threat prevention. And it does so like no other vendor because it has the full breadth of protection technologies across the security connected platform. And it demonstrates how it is possible to evolve from siloed security controls to a security platform where each system is operating as a system of systems, if you like. So, Tom, that completes the presentation. I'd be very happy to take some questions from you.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks, Robert, for a very interesting presentation. As you said, we can now take a few questions from our audience. And the first question that we have is, you mentioned cross-vendor integration of security controls. Many people are skeptical about this ever happening. So why do you believe it will?
Okay, so I completely understand why there might be skepticism out there about vendors collaborating to integrate their products and to share intelligence, especially if you consider all of us vendors, we ultimately compete for the same security budgets and compete for the same dollars, right? I would say, though, that there is already some pretty good evidence of vendors working together and working together in good faith to share threat information for the purposes of improving defenses generally. So if you look at the Cyber Threat Alliance, of which Intel Security and Fortinet and Palo Alto and Symantec are a member, I mean, that's one example of that. But I suppose in terms of the cross-vendor integration of security products, I think it's inevitable and it will become ubiquitous in the future for the same reasons that via this Cyber Threat Alliance, vendors are starting to share threat intelligence and indicators of compromise more openly. And the market is demanding it, really. And the market is demanding it because it's increasingly being recognized as the only way to defend against the targeted attackers. Security controls and silo are set up to fail. The other reason why I'm really confident, and I'm less skeptical, let's say, as a security professional, is I know that Intel is 100% committed to delivering the security connected platform, starting with the data exchange layer. So you know, when I hear that Intel are 100% committed to it, it gives me confidence because Intel has a very long and proven track record of defining new architectures and defining standards in the market. So when they see potential risks to the continuing growth and use of technology to solve problems, they remove those barriers, they remove those risks. So I mean, one example of that is Wi-Fi, right? Intel standardized and made Wi-Fi technology ubiquitous, not because they wanted to be a Wi-Fi vendor, but because they wanted to they saw lack of mobility as a barrier to the continuing growth, if you like, of IT, and so they want to remove security as a challenge, and they see the need for cross-vendor security control integration as key to that, and so they're pushing that in the market. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Robert. Got another question, which is you spoke about using a data security layer to enable communications between the so-called silos. But is there a danger that the data security layer itself becomes an exploitable channel?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a danger. Yeah, I mean it becomes another asset, if you like, in your environment. And just like any other asset, you need to make sure that that asset is secured, it's hardened, that you're aware of what vulnerabilities exist or could potentially exist for it. You need to ensure that it's in a secure location in the overall network, and all of that general best practice. And just like for all of our other security products, we provide and share those best practices with our customers. I mean, also by design, one thing I would say is that this data exchange layer, it's based on underlying technology that is already used in a very significant amount of commercial applications. So it's used very widely already on the internet and has been proven to be secure. So, for example, I mentioned during the presentation, one of those security features is that the connection between the client and the DXL is secured via TLS encryption, for example. And I guess we'd be happy in product management, I know we'll be happy to provide any further detail necessary to any folks that would like to explore that in more detail.
Right, so it's based on proven technology then? Yes.
Yes.
Right, okay. Another question that we've got here is many security operations teams have concerns about automation. What best practices do you suggest to ensure that automation does not create false positives and damage business productivity?
Yeah, so I mean that's a concern. It's one we hear quite frequently. Security ops teams don't want to be regarded as the guys that inhibit business, and I appreciate that their credibility can be eroded when there are false positives, in particular when those false positives have an impact on systems and on business continuity. I'm not sure I can offer any specific best practices. That depends on very much the control or the set of security controls in question, perhaps one good place to start would be to look at the SANS Institute released some very good material on how to streamline risk management by automating their security controls, or the SANS 20 proposed security controls. I think that's a good place to start. But what I would say, though, more than that is, automation is a necessary reality, because the over-reliance on the manual assessment and manual response and mitigation has been one of the key contributors to the, what we're seeing in the threat landscape and the increase in cybercrime and data breaches. And any defenses that can be automated, in my opinion, should be automated. So, I mean, if we look at the example we looked at, is if you find a malicious file in your environment, then all of the security controls across endpoint, network, and gateway should really be made aware of this, and they should automatically update their defenses to block this. And then it makes sense that if you found it, you should look back over time and see, okay, based on all the characteristics of this, have I ever seen this or behavior associated with this in my environment in history? So being able to ask those questions in an automated way is really, really important. And I believe it's the only way to reduce that time, if you like, from discovery to full containment.
Right, okay, very good. Now, another question here for us is, it's difficult, as it is, for security operations teams to filter the huge amount of information generated by existing security appliances. So will the interconnectedness in the communications between these devices, the data security layer itself, only generate more information for them to assess?
Yeah, okay, so that's a very valid concern. I know that's front of mind of every security operations person that we speak to when we talk about new security controls. I guess the first thing is to say that the architecture that I've discussed over the last 40 minutes or so, and what I've been proposing is how better to leverage what is existing and to share intelligence across existing security controls of any vendor, as opposed to adding multiple new security controls that are just going to generate more and more alerts and more logs. That's the first point I would make. So the second point I guess I would make is related to the answer to the previous question, which is really that what I'm discussing and what I'm proposing is more of a focus on automation. So much less of a focus on manually trawling through alerts and logs, and more setting up your security architecture so that those alerts turn into intelligence that's actionable and where action is taken in an automated way. So the use case that I stepped through and explained, where you have a file executing on an endpoint for the very first time, everything that I showed in terms of the interaction between the security controls and how the security controls were ultimately made aware that they should block, that was all automated and would take place in milliseconds. So the solution actually will take away a lot of the manual effort, and through automation remove the need to trawl through the alerts and the sea of noise, if you like. So hopefully that makes sense.
And will this catch? Do you reckon that this will catch most of the alerts? Do you think this will, or will it catch all of them?
I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't believe there is anything as a silver bullet. One thing I would say for sure is that the approach that I've proposed, I'm really passionate about, because I believe that if all of your security defenses are set up in silo, then they're set up to fail.
Right. Okay. Now the architecture that you presented for endpoint anti-malware looks very relevant to those minority of enterprises unfortunate enough to be targeted in this way. But what about the majority of enterprises that are not subject to zero-day custom-made malware attacks? Does this architecture provide a return on investment to those enterprises?
Okay. So hold on a second there. I think there's really very strong evidence from the threat landscape, from our own labs research, from the excellent labs research of a lot of the different security vendors out there, and from the likes of Verizon that I quoted a couple of times in my presentation. There's a lot of research out there to indicate that enterprises of all shapes and sizes, have either been the victim of targeted attacks or don't yet know that they have been the victim of a targeted attack or an advanced persistent threat. But if we just put that fact aside for a moment, and if we consider the endpoint anti-malware solution only, threat intelligence exchange on its own, it does improve endpoint detection. So it improves endpoint detection for malware never seen before, for zero-day malware. And for sure this will help with zero-day malware that's used in targeted attacks. But I would encourage all of us not to forget that zero-day malware is also commonly used in what we call the more opportunistic malware attacks. I think it's pretty cool to think that all zero-day malware is handcrafted at great cost and meant for only one organization, but that's not always the case. In fact, in the vast majority, it is not the case, right? So we're seeing a huge increase in zero-day never being seen before malware because the barrier to creating these types of malware has been significantly reduced. So it's not that difficult to leverage polymorphic techniques in a malware toolkit to create code that looks different each time it executes, each time it propagates, but for the end result to be the same. So I don't think you can decouple zero-day malware as a problem, I think you can rather decouple zero-day malware as a problem and also advanced persistent threats. And the threat intelligence exchange that we've just discussed will certainly help across both spheres, and I believe provide a return on investment and a value add to enterprises of any size.
Now, a question from me, just following up on that, actually, are there any opportunities to scale this up to beyond the enterprise, so to go, for many enterprises to cooperate in the sharing of threat intelligence using this model?
Yeah, for sure. So we already see that, I guess, at a vendor level through the cyber threat intelligence is one example. We also see sharing of threat intelligence across market vertical. In the ISAC, FS ISACs, you see, as one example of that, we see financial companies coming together, banks, large banking institutions sharing threat intelligence. So I think sharing of threat intelligence we're seeing now at a vendor level, at an industry, across markets, and at a government level, for sure. And there's a lot of standardization around that, if you like. I think the integration of security controls within an enterprise was more the focus for the conversation that we had today. I'm not sure and can't think of a specific use case right now where a security control in one enterprise would need to be integrated with a security control in a different enterprise. I think it's more to do with the sharing of intelligence and using standards like OpenIOC to share threat intelligence between the different enterprises. And I think there's a lot of good work ongoing at the moment around that. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Robert. So many of the barriers to implementing more connected architectures and platform-based approaches are organizational and not technological. So what strategy would you suggest to security operations teams to remove the siloed approach to their internal IT teams?
Yeah, so I think that's a very accurate observation, I would say. Quite often the barrier is not technology. And we see this in smaller enterprises with hundreds of employees, right up to a very large enterprise with many thousands of employees, where you have different functional groups, so like network operations and data center ops and systems groups that own one of those sort of areas, one of those siloed areas, if you like. So in other words, when I say that controls are set up in silo, it's not just the control or the technology that is siloed. It can quite often be the team that owns and manages the product is also operating in silo. So I guess the best advice I could offer, my advice I would offer, is that the security team and the people that have responsibility for security in their organization you need to explain the threat, the risk, and to evangelize on the need for closer integration of and sharing of intelligence across the security controls. So between the guy that owns the server infrastructure, the virtual infrastructure, the data center, and maybe the guy that owns or girl or the team that own the network security controls. Right. And of course they can use the attack chain or the attack chain modeling in order to do that. One final point on this, though, I would say, Tom, is it's amazing how those internal organizational barriers can come down whenever there is a compelling business event. And that's why I'm very passionate that we will see this paradigm shift in architectures, if you like, because the threat landscape and targeted attacks in particular in the threat landscape is increasingly becoming the compelling event.
Right. Okay. Now, we're coming to the end of our time, Robert, but just one last quick question for you. Of the points you've made in your presentation, what would you say is the most important thing that users can take away from it?
I guess if there's one thing I'd like the attendees to take away, I'd like them to consider the key difference that I outlined between the opportunistic malware attack and the targeted attack. The targeted attacker does not give up. They keep trying to find a different route into the organization until they're ultimately successful. And so it's very important that all of the different security controls that make a block along the way share what they've learned with every other security control. And the only way to do that is to integrate them and to share intelligence across them.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Our thanks to Robert Dumigan for sharing his insight and expertise today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. This webcast will be available on demand beginning tomorrow on our website, scmagazineuk.com, under the Events tab. Goodbye.
Thank you, Intel Security, and thank you, all of you, for taking the time out to join us today. I hope you found the webinar useful. I'm sure many of you will have questions to ask. Please give us a call on 01628 418 000 or email us at McAfee@axial.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you and we'll be delighted to help. Finally, you can find out more about us and what we can do for you at www.axial.co.uk, and you can register for next month's webinar at the link you can see on the screen right now. If you do it now, you won't forget later. Thank you. See you next month.